Welcome back to The Art of Plenty. I'm Amy McInnes, and I am so glad you were tuning in today. I'm so looking forward to talking to all you women out there because I know that I am not the only one who's been having these types of conversations. It seems like every time I turn around, I have another person in my life that I really care about that has back pain. And I'm not talking about the men in my life. Maybe because men don't tell me when they have back pain. I don't know. But women, I hear all the time. And these women aren't complainers. The women that are talking to me about being in pain, having issues with their back, not being able to fix it, having ongoing issues, I feel like every time I turn around, another person is bringing this up. And like I said, these women are not complainers. And the other piece is it's not just the same women over and over again that are telling me that they're in pain or that they're having issues with their back. It's multiple women in multiple different settings. I was at a hockey tournament a couple weeks ago, sitting down with a bunch of women. We're having glasses of wine, not me because I don't drink. And not that there's any judgment there. It still kind of hits me a little bit that I don't drink just because it's such a social thing in our society. So it feels a bit unusual when I'm doing social things without alcohol. So it tends to stand out to me. And we're sitting around and I'm talking with another person and we're talking about working out. And she's telling me that she had to take 4 months off because she had a back injury. Now, this is a fit woman that I was talking to. And yeah, 4 months off with an injury, which compared to some of the other women I've been talking about, that is a short recovery period for back issues. Now, you know my education if you've been around for a while. I have no education whatsoever in physical therapy, in kinetics, in anything health related. I'm not a nurse. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a physiotherapist. I'm not a chiropractor. I'm not an osteopath. None of it. I have no background in that whatsoever. So the information that I'm sharing with you today is simply things that I have collected over the years and things that I have noticed in my own life as a woman and as a person who's had conversations with many women who are experiencing back pain. Here's the part that I can't get over. Is there a correlation between having babies and having back pain? And the reason why this is obvious to me is because of all of the women that I have talked to that have back pain, that is a direct correlation. All of these women have had babies, have had more than one baby. Well, actually, one person I'm thinking of in particular, she just has one. But everybody has had pregnancies and everybody has had deliveries and then recovered or in the process of recovering from childbirth. Now, just because there is a correlation does not mean that there's a causation, because there's probably way more women who have had babies that don't necessarily have back pain than women that have had babies that do. But the reason why I'm drawing attention to that is because pregnancy does a number on your core and your lower back, which is where all of the injuries have occurred for all of these women I have been talking about. Your lower back is a part of your core. So when I'm talking about core, I'm not just talking about your stomach muscles and your six-pack and your abdominal muscles. I'm talking about the whole core system. So the pelvic floor, your hips, your lower back, and your abdominal muscles, including your transverse abdominis. So those deeper muscles that are kind of run down the side towards your pelvic bone. Now, when you go through pregnancy, you automatically weaken your core. And when you go through delivery, again, you weaken your core because it impacts your pelvic floor, or even if you have a cesarean, there's still impact to your pelvic floor. Plus, you have the added benefit or the added non-benefit of weakness to your actual front muscles because they cut right through everything in order to get the baby out, which is miraculous that we can deliver that way and such a gift for so many women. But it doesn't negate the fact that that's serious abdominal surgery, which has repercussions for your core. And you know what the part that is so frustrating for me about all of these things is I don't know what I don't know. And what I mean when I say that is when I went into pregnancy, I had a lot of naivety on what my body could do and would do and should do. I assumed that I would go through pregnancy, I would have my baby, and then my body would heal. It would know how to do all of those things like carry a baby, deliver a baby, and it would also know how to heal because I believe, and I hold fast to this belief, that given the right circumstances, our bodies have within themselves an ability to heal. Now, there are things that definitely get in the way of that healing process, like stress, not having good food, and not having clean water, and all of those things. But in general, I believe that our bodies are designed to heal themselves given the correct situation. So I was under the impression that I wouldn't necessarily have to do anything and my body would heal. That was not right. I had ignorance about that. I did not know until I think after my fifth baby, or maybe just before my fifth baby, that there were exercises that I was going to have to do to get my body to recover. But even more than that, had I done certain things prior to pregnancy, during pregnancy, I could have avoided a lot of the turmoil that I had after all of my pregnancies. So specifically what I'm talking about is a diastasis recti. So that's when your ab muscles separate and the connective tissue, which I believe is called the linea alba, is stretched and no longer has the same tension that it had prior to childbirth. Now, you can have diastasis recti even if you haven't had babies. So this is something that men can experience, or women, especially if they're carrying a lot of extra weight in their midsection and it's causing those ab muscles to pull apart and that linea alba to weaken. When you have pregnancy, some of the most common stat, and I mean, you can find stats because there's so much different research, you can find different stats that indicate different things. But in general, they figure that 60% of women have a diastasis recti in their first pregnancy. Now, every time you get pregnant, the possibility that you're going to have a diastasis increases with every pregnancy. So if you've had more than one pregnancy, you can pretty much assume that your body did that. Now, of the 60%, only a third of that after a year still had separation. And again, we're talking about first pregnancy. So at 21 weeks pregnancy, at 21 weeks, so just over half your term, 33% have that diastasis, whereas 60% 6 weeks post delivery have that. So it does change. Those stats do change depending on the time. Now, at 6 months, when your baby is 6 months, 45% still have a diastasis. And sometimes women don't heal it. And here's the deal. And I absolutely love this because, again, it speaks to the body's ability to heal. It's never too late to heal your stomach muscles. It's never too late to get it together. But when I first started learning about this, we didn't realize that there should be any separation, that there was a bit of a natural separation. And you don't necessarily know what your separation is for your body unless you've tracked it pre having a diastasis. So having it tight together isn't necessarily beneficial. There should be a little bit of movement there, is my understanding. And it really has to do with the integrity of the linea alba, which is like, in my mind, and this may not be exactly correct, but in my mind, I picture it as like kind of like an elastic. And if you stretch it too much, yeah, it'll go back, but it doesn't have the same integrity that it had prior to getting really stretched out. And it's not so much the size of gap, it's the depth. So when you check it, depending on how far down you can bury your fingers. So when you check it, it depends how far you can bury your fingers down into that split, that gives you a sense of how intact the linea alba is and what if you still have a diastasis recti. Now, here is the deal. Here's why this is problematic. A diastasis recti causes lower back pain. Now, there's the injuries of the women that I have talked to. There are people that have actually hurt their back. So they heard a pop, their back went out. There was actually some type of mechanism of injury. They were doing something and they weren't even necessarily doing anything that was unusual or anything that was odd. It's just, maybe they were working out and they had always done those exercises. And then for whatever reason in that moment, something changed and their back was hurt. But there's also that sense like, it doesn't matter. I just have lower back pain, where there's not necessarily a mechanism of injury. So people with a diastasis recti can have lower back pain. And I'm just talking like your back can just hurt, because that's the direct opposite side of that core. So when we're talking about that core system where your diaphragm is on the top, directly around from the lower back is where your stomach muscles are. So if that is open at the front and doesn't have the same stability, then all of that pressure, all of the work that your core does, your back carries more of that. So it's more prone to injury. It's more prone to stress. And I think that contributes to why there's so many injuries. Now, here's the deal. If you can check many different ways to see if you have a diastasis, but one of the other indicators is that mummy tummy or that pooch. I hate that word. Just sounds nasty coming off of my mouth. But when there is a weak diastasis, you get that pooch. Now, when there's a weak pelvic floor, it totally looks different. Do you remember, or have you ever seen after women give birth and it's like their butt is flat? It's more like, it's just flat. Like it doesn't have the same muscle definition. It's like a mum bum. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you noticed this before? I didn't know this at the time when I first started noticing mum butts, but it's actually an indication that your pelvic floor hasn't recovered, that it isn't healed. Because in order to not have that flat butt, you have to have a healthy pelvic floor. This is the bottom part of that core system. And what's amazing about this totally floored me. So I was working on repairing and healing my diastasis for years, and I couldn't quite get that same connection at the end. And still, even when I do Pilates, there's some movements that I can't get my back to relax enough that my core does the work. So this is the teaser for me. For whatever reason, I can't get my back to open up and allow my stomach muscles to come up. And it's because for so long, my back did the work. And so I'm trying to retrain my body that my stomach can do the work, because I have healed my diastasis, and that my back can just take a break. But it's not used to doing that at all. But here's the cool thing. I did not get my diastasis recti to actually heal, to actually close, until I did significant amounts of pelvic floor work. I did a program for 60 days straight. So every day for 60 days, the program was designed to be a 30-day, rebuild your pelvic floor. So I did it twice, back to back, not a day off, not a break, for 60 days. And it was through that my diastasis closed the final bit and healed and had connection. And it's kind of one of those things like, is this recovered? Has this actually worked? And I still have a bit of a paunch, but that's fat. And when I've seen a professional, I said, okay, where's my core at? They're like, yeah, you don't have a diastasis anymore. You've healed this, which is mind-boggling to me, that it wasn't the diastasis exercises work that actually finished the job. It was the pelvic floor piece, which to me just speaks to this piece around the core is so connected. So I'm convinced that part of the reason why so many women I'm talking to are having issues with their lower back is related to diastasis recti, weak pelvic floor, and our back being used to having to carry the load for all those other parts. Because when you're pregnant and when you have a newborn baby, we rely on our back so much to do the work because our core can't when we're 40 weeks pregnant and we're carrying all that extra weight. And after you've had a vaginal birth and your pelvic floor is like a smashed egg, it takes time for that to recover. And as that's recovering, your back has to pick up the slack. I think that's why it's so important to be so wise when we're recovering from labor and when we're recovering from pregnancy to be easy on ourselves. But oh my gosh, is that ever hard? Like, our culture is not set up to support women to heal properly after pregnancy and childbirth and delivery. There's so much emphasis on you can do it, you can get your body back, now's the time, you're finally not pregnant anymore. But it's not actually like that. I remember talking with a pelvic floor specialist, a physiotherapist, and she was talking about how what she has noticed with women is they get back and they start jogging. Like, we have jogging strollers for little babies. Like, and I mean, I know we've changed some of the ways that you shouldn't be jogging with a baby that's younger than 6 months because they don't have the neck stability and whatnot. And kids can be in strollers for years. So I get all that. But what she said, that women, after they'll have their baby, they don't rebuild their pelvic floor properly. They start running or jogging with or without their baby is not of consequence. And they don't realize that that is what contributes to prolapse in your 50s. So in the moment, you don't realize the impact that you're having on your body by running because you're not getting prolapse right then. But because the core hasn't been rebuilt, because the pelvic floor hasn't been rebuilt, you're more susceptible to injuries down the road. Like, nobody told me that at that time. I mean, fortunately, I wasn't a runner, so I didn't have that situation, but I did not know that I needed to be rebuilding my pelvic floor. And it's not like I got any of that information from the hospital. I never got that information from my doctor after giving birth. I went to, my appointments and everything is about the baby and how are you doing? And yeah, I'm doing great. Because you don't know. Like, you think, okay, is this normal? I did not know I was going to feel like I got hit by a truck after I delivered my first baby. Like, your whole body aches. I just didn't know. And you go for that appointment, like that 6-week checkup, and the response is, yeah, you're good. You're good. 6 weeks, you can have sex again, or like, what does this have anything to do with whether or not I've rebuilt my pelvic floor? Like, at 6 weeks, I hadn't done any pelvic floor exercises. There was no, I was good to go. Like, that totally negates the amount of trauma that happens to a woman's body when she delivers a baby vaginally. But I get it too. And to be honest, they could have told me things and I don't even know that I would have retained it, because you're not in the hospital for very long after giving birth. And there's a lot that you are dealing with, like how to change diapers and how to get a good latch. And there's so much information. They probably have to be really, really intentional and deliberate with what information are they giving these moms and what do they need to know. And honestly, they're prioritizing that you keep the baby alive, which makes perfect sense to me. But there just is there's not enough time to cover everything when you're only there for 24 hours or 12 hours or whatever it is. There's not enough time to get the support, and you don't even necessarily know when things are right or wrong. I remember when I was breastfeeding my first, I had no sniff that it shouldn't hurt as bad as it hurt. I had a crack like the size of the Grand Canyon in my nipple. It was horrendous. And when I first started breastfeeding, they're like, yeah, it's going to hurt for a few days. I'm like, okay, it's just taking longer, I guess. It was a month of like my nipple bleeding and it like toe curling pain every time she fed. It was so awful. And again, I just didn't know. Like I thought I was doing everything right. And so then I went to see a lactation specialist and they helped me out and I figured it out and the pain went away and the crack healed and all of those things. But I just didn't know. And even though they told me how to get a good latch while I was at the hospital, as the baby grew, as my milk came in, everything changed because you leave the hospital before your milk comes in. So you don't necessarily know how to navigate all of those things when it's a first baby. And there's so many things that the nurses and the doctors have to tell us. And the most important thing is keeping the baby alive. So I get it. I get why they don't talk about how to rebuild your pelvic floor. I get why they don't talk about diastasis recti. I just feel like we're doing such a disservice because now what I'm noticing is when I'm talking with all these women whose kids are older, they now actually have the time to be working out. They have more energy to be doing things. And now people are getting significant back issues. Like I'm talking years of pain and they put their back out. It's a year to heal, 2 years to heal because there's damage or spurs or whatever the problem is. And then there's another injury. And I just keep thinking, can't we do better? Can't we do better? And there's so much information on the internet that sometimes it's really difficult to find good, trustworthy information. And yeah. So here's where I'm going with this. If you've had babies and you have been fortunate enough to not have back pain, do something now to make sure that you've rebuilt your pelvic floor and that you've recovered or repaired your stomach muscles, because the likelihood that you've had a diastasis recti is really great, like 60% if it's a first pregnancy. And if you've had more than one pregnancy, the number goes up to like the 90s. It's bananas for how many women have that. And it may not heal on its own. And if you're like me and you've had 5 pregnancies, the likelihood that you've had some is incredible. And if you've had a cesarean, you're more likely to have diastasis recti. And if you've had a vaginal birth, you're more likely to have pelvic floor issues. We need to talk about this more because we want to support other women and prevent women from having back pain because it's debilitating. I was talking to this one person and I could have just wept. Like, haven't been able to get out of bed at all and has like a young family and can't get out of bed, can hardly, like, fortunately is able to work from home, but works pretty much from her bed on her computer. Like, it's not supposed to be like that. Pregnancy and having children is supposed to be a joy. And I know that this is different, but to me, it's all together. If children are supposed to be a joy, if children are a joy, then the whole process should have joy. Not that it's not going to have difficulty or hardship, but our bodies should be able to recover, and we should be able to protect our bodies and heal our bodies to prevent injury like this. I'm clearly passionate about this because I feel for all those women in my life who now have time to do things because their kids are older, but now their body has failed them because maybe nobody told them how to rebuild their pelvic floor, how to rebuild their stomach muscle, how to rebuild their core. It's so essential for every movement we do. I'm so glad you tuned in today. I'm always happy to share my thoughts. Please note that this is not to, this session today, this episode is not to replace any information from a professional. This is me talking about my experiences and what I've noticed. But please, if you're at all concerned that your pelvic floor isn't up to snuff, go see a pelvic floor specialist. There are a lot of talented people. They can tell you straight up what the deal is with your vagina and whether or not you need to do some work. And there's so many great programs online to help rebuild pelvic floor. Same thing with a diastasis recti. Go see a specialist and get a sense of what's going on. And if you can't afford that, there's lots of really good resources online. It's pretty easy to check to see if you have a DR, and there's some really good resources out there. I just found that I just had to keep trying different things because this program would close it a little bit more and then it would get stuck, and then I'd try a new program and then that would close it a little bit more. And as everything else, sleep, food, exercise, water, all of those things matter. So get some professional help and be encouraged. Your body can heal. It's just a matter of figuring out the best way to support it so that it can do its job. Thanks for tuning in. Have a beautiful day.